Ascent Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Practice of Adaptive Leadership, Tools and Tactics for Changing Your Organization and the World, by Ronald A. Heifetz, Alexander Grashow, and Marty Linsky. Narrated by Daniel Henning. Publisher's Note: in this audio edition, you will hear references to visual elements present in the print and ebook formats of the book. Preface. On a beautiful spring evening in 2006, the three of us, two Boston Red Sox fans and a New York Mets fan, were watching a Red Sox baseball game on television at Ron's house. The Red Sox were well ahead. The conversation began to drift to reflecting on the insights we had gleaned from the clients and students with whom we had worked over the past quarter century as they tried to apply the frameworks we've offered to their own challenges of leadership on important and tough issues. This book grew out of our conversation that evening. Our previously published work had been focused on developing the conceptual framework and practical basis for adaptive leadership. But as we talked together that night, we realized that we knew a lot more about the operational nitty-gritty, how to actually do adaptive leadership, than we had written before. The efforts of people with whom we had worked across all three sectors and all over the globe had created a real-time virtual learning laboratory for translating leadership into practical tools and techniques for leading adaptive change. By the end of that evening, we understood that together we had enough of a track record of real experience that we had the opportunity, perhaps even the responsibility, to share these insights and emerging best practices with a wider audience. The tools and tactics for leading adaptive change should be treated, we believe, in the same spirit as open-source technology, made broadly available, so that people who lead adaptive change can learn from each other and improve their skills, and all of us improve our insights into practice. During that evening, we talked about several people with whom we had recently worked. Gail went well beyond her job description to help people in her firm deal with persistently troubling external and internal pressures. Drew deliberately gave up a role he enjoyed enormously and performed with unique competence, defining his professional identity, and stepped into discomfort and incompetence by taking on new responsibilities to enable his firm to reach higher aspirations. Ed walked away from a secure career he loved with its promising personal trajectory to build an institution committed to helping the people of his state tackle the big questions, knowing he was going to have to raise the heat carefully in the system to have an impact. Clive and Brian took significant risks within each of their governments to develop the leadership capacity of senior officials to operate more creatively, courageously, and wisely in mobilizing collaboration and innovation across sectors in their countries. And Debbie believed so deeply in the need for leadership in her religious community that she put her own job on the line to change the way her organization thought about the qualities needed in its senior people. Each of them faced what we call an adaptive challenge for themselves and for the communities in which they took action. In order to exercise leadership on that challenge, they had to go beyond what people expected of them, risk testing some relationships, and move themselves and their organizations into unfamiliar territory. They had to be coolly realistic and skilled at diagnosing their own resources and constraints, and make some necessary adaptations in their own preferred behaviors. And they needed to do the same cool-headed diagnosis for the situation. Understand the underlying value conflicts embedded in the strategy of the organization or community, what and whose interests benefited from the status quo, and the political dynamics that both kept their organizations in their current equilibrium and offered some potential for catalyzing change. They each learned in the midst of action, made some mistakes and mid-course corrections, and stayed the course. Their journeys are close-to-home sagas of leading adaptive change, with all the dangers, ambiguity, setbacks, and improvisations that leadership journeys involve. As of this writing, none of their journeys are over. The work of leadership continues. In this book, we've tried to capture their experiences and those of many others, usually appropriately disguised, with whom we have worked in the classroom or the field, at the tactical level, teasing out lessons, and then creating straightforward, practical, accessible resources and tools in the hope that doing so will be useful to you as you take on the issues you consider most important. Everything in this book comes from the field and has been tested there by our clients and students. They've been out on the edge, trying techniques and honing their skills, and we are no more than the vehicles for transmitting their insights to you. In a very real sense, this field book is a tribute to them, our clients and students, who have taught us more than they can imagine. Part 1. Introduction. Purpose and Possibility. If you want to help your organization, your community, and your society thrive in a changing world, this book is for you. If you want to mobilize greater progress on the issues most important to you, this book is for you. If you want to strengthen your practice of leadership no matter where you sit in your society or organization, this book is for you. If you want to help others strengthen their capacity for change as a trainer, coach, consultant, facilitator, or friend, this book is for you. This book is about possibility. Not daydreaming, wishful thinking possibility, but rather a roll-up-your-sleeves, optimistic, realistic, courage-generating, and make significant progress kind of possibility. Leadership for change demands inspiration and perspiration. We present tools and tactics to lead and stay alive, to build up a sweat by inspiring others, to mobilize people to tackle tough problems while reaching high. This book comes out of our experience in working with people in organizations around the world, across sectors, cultures, and countries, in positions high and low, helping them tackle their most pressing challenges. We've had the blessing and have taken no greater delight than helping people get more traction on moving their organizations, communities, and societies forward. These are extraordinary times. The turn of the millennium brought the pressing realization that every human being, as a member of a globalizing set of nations, cultures, and economies, might find better ways to compete and collaborate. To build a sustainable world in an era of profound economic and environmental interdependence, each person, each country, each organization is challenged to sift through the wisdom and know-how of their heritage, to take the best from their histories, leave behind lessons that no longer serve them, and innovate, not for change's sake, but for the sake of conserving and preserving the values and competence they find most essential and precious. This is a tall order, requiring people to look backward and forward at the same time. Looking backward, the challenge is to discover new ways to more quickly put to rest the traumas of the past in order to build a post-empire, post-crusades, and post-colonial world. Looking forward, human beings have the ability to realize ancient dreams of civility, curiosity, and care as we tackle the pressing issues that surround us. These times call for new ways of doing the business of our daily lives as we take on these purposes with new, more adaptive solutions. Between the time we wrote the bulk of our last book, Leadership on the Line, and its publication date, we experienced 9/11. Between the time we wrote the bulk of this book and its publication date, we saw Barack Obama elected President of the United States and the world economy go into crisis. The challenges posed by 9/11 and the international economic meltdown are in part the unresolved dilemmas of old ways, and in part they are new. They are not amenable to authoritative expertise, although people might hope that if the right subject matter expert could only be found, these problems would be solved. These are what we call adaptive challenges, gaps generated by bold aspirations amid challenging realities. For these, the world needs to build new ways of being and responding beyond the current repertoires of available know-how. What is needed from a leadership perspective are new forms of improvisational expertise, a kind of process expertise that knows prudently how to experiment with never-been-tried-before relationships, means of communication, and ways of interacting that will help people develop solutions that build upon and surpass the wisdom of today's experts. That is the aim of this book, to provide an understanding of the processes and practices of leadership so that you can address the adaptive pressures that challenge anyone's current individual and collective competence. The answers cannot come only from on high. The world needs distributed leadership because the solutions to our collective challenges must come from many places, with people developing micro-adaptations to all the different micro-environments of families, neighborhoods, and organizations around the globe. Adaptive leadership is an approach to making progress on the most important challenges you face in your piece and part of the world, presumably in your professional life, but perhaps in your personal life as well. Our concepts, tools, and tactics aim to help you mobilize people towards some collective purpose, a purpose that exists beyond your own individual ambition. For some people, the hardest part of this work might be finding the courage to identify and claim what is more important to you, those goals and challenges for which it is worth taking on the pains and risks of leadership. Our work begins with the assumption that there is no reason to exercise leadership, to have a courageous conversation with a boss or a spouse, for example, or to take a risk on a new idea, unless you care about something deeply. What outcome would make the effort and the risk worthwhile? What purpose would sustain you to stay in the game when it gets rough? For other people, figuring out their purposes is not as daunting as grasping the practices required for making progress, stepping out into the unknown skillfully. We try to address both parts in this field book, purpose and skill. Our goal is to provide practical steps you can take to act further on behalf of your deepest values, to maximize the chances of success and minimize the chances of your being taken out of action. We hope to enrich your personal and professional capacity to accomplish what you care most deeply about. Chapter 1. How to use this book. The practice of adaptive leadership is a field book for two reasons. First, we've written it from the field, drawing on our experiences with thousands of people who are trying to create something better from the current reality. Second, we have designed it for the field, to be of day-to-day utility in your own leadership efforts. As we wrote this book, we imagined you coming home after a particularly frustrating day at work trying to move an important initiative forward. We envisioned you using one of the balcony reflections to understand better why events did not go as well as you'd hoped, or using one of the leadership exercises to develop your next plan of action. Perhaps you've picked up this book to figure out how to organize a 6-month program to reverse a problem of high turnover among your company's most talented employees. Or maybe you're using it to prepare for a particularly important meeting with key constituencies that resist wrestling with the perspective you offer. Perhaps you'll copy a resonant section of this book or a particularly useful graphic for your team to create a shared understanding of a challenge you face together. You might even find it helpful for making progress on a tough problem at home. We have designed this book with that flexibility in mind. You can listen to it from start to finish or browse to find the concepts and tools most useful for understanding and dealing with a particular adaptive challenge you're facing. The book has a beginning, middle, and end, with a storyline and an organizing frame. But we've also constructed it with self-contained elements and a detailed index so you can go directly to the ideas and activities that speak to the specific challenges before you. To these ends, the book is organized into 5 parts: an introductory part and 4 content parts, displayed in the matrix in Figure 1.1, which captures the 4 essential practices of adaptive leadership. While the 4 practice parts of the book come after one another in linear sequence, the matrix is meant to highlight that you need not use the book that way. How did we get to this matrix? We find it's often best to start with what's salient to you. The practice of leadership, like the practice of medicine, involves 2 core processes: diagnosis first and then action. And those 2 processes unfold in 2 dimensions: toward the organizational or social system you're operating in and toward yourself. That is, you diagnose what is happening in your organization or community and take action to address the problems you have identified. But to lead effectively, you also have to examine and take action toward yourself in the context of the challenge. In the midst of action, you have to be able to reflect on your own attitudes and behavior to better calibrate your interventions into the complex dynamics of organizations and communities. You need perspective on yourself as well as on the systemic context in which you operate. The process of diagnosis and action begins with data collection and problem identification, the what, moves through an interpretive stage, the why, and on to potential approaches to action as a series of interventions into the organization, community, or society, the what next. Typically, the problem-solving process is iterative, moving back and forth among data collection, interpretation, and action. There is a logic to the sequencing of the 4 parts, even though we have written them so that you can dive into any of the 4 depending on where you locate yourself in your leadership challenge. We ordered the 4 sections in Figure 1.1 to counteract 2 tendencies that often stymie progress. First, in most organizations, people feel pressure to solve problems quickly, to move to action, so they minimize the time spent in diagnosis, collecting data, exploring multiple possible interpretations of the situation and alternative potential interventions. To counteract this drive toward a quick fix response based on a too swift assessment of the situation, we spend a lot of time in this book on diagnosis. What is really going on here? For both the system level and the self-level sections of the adaptive leadership process. The single most important skill and most undervalued capacity for exercising adaptive leadership is diagnosis. In most companies and societies, those who have moved up the hierarchy into senior positions of authority are naturally socialized and trained to be good at taking action and decisively solving problems. There is no incentive to wade knee-deep into the murky waters of diagnosis, especially if some of the deeper diagnostic possibilities will be upsetting to people who look to you for clarity and certainty. Moreover, when you're caught up in the action, it's hard to do the diagnostic work of seeing the larger patterns in the organization or community. People who look to you for solutions have a stake in keeping you focused on what is right in front of your eyes. The phone calls and emails to be answered, the deadlines to be met, the tasks to be completed. To diagnose a system, or yourself while in the midst of action, requires the ability to achieve some distance from those on-the-ground events. We use the metaphor of getting on the balcony above the dance floor to depict what it means to gain the distanced perspective you need to see what is really happening. If you stay moving on the dance floor, all you will see will be the people dancing with you and around you. Swept up in the music, it may be a great party. But when you get on the balcony, you may see a very different picture. From that vantage point, you might notice that the band is playing so loudly that everyone is dancing on the far side of the room, that when the music changes from fast to slow or back again, different groups of people decide to dance, and that many people hang back near the exit doors and do not dance, whatever the music. Not such a great party after all. If someone asked you later to describe the dance, you would paint a very different picture if you'd seen it from the balcony rather than only from the dance floor. When you move back and forth between balcony and dance floor, you can continually assess what is happening in your organization and take corrective mid-course action. If you perfect this skill, you might even be able to do both simultaneously, keeping one eye on the events happening immediately around you and the other eye on the larger patterns and dynamics. Second, too often in organizational life, people begin analyzing problems by personalizing them, if only Joe was a leader, or attributing the situation to interpersonal conflict. Sally and Bill don't collaborate very well because their work styles are so at odds. This tendency often obscures a deeper, more systemic, and perhaps more threatening understanding of the situation. For example, Sally and Bill represent conflicting perspectives on the tough strategic trade-offs that need to be made in our harsh economic client, and each is protecting the functions and jobs of their own people. The conflict is structural, not personal, even if it's taken on a personal tone. To counteract the personalization of problems, start with diagnosing and acting on the system, moving outside in, and then do the same for the self, moving inside out. Nevertheless, in our view, systemic and personal realities always play out simultaneously. Thus, adaptive leadership is an iterative activity, an ongoing engagement between you and groups of people. But to strengthen your ability to practice this kind of leadership, you have to start somewhere. The good news is that you can do so at any point in the process. Diagnosis of the system or yourself, or action on the system or yourself. Overview. In this book, you will find ideas, resources, practices, and examples meant to help you lead adaptive work in whatever context you work. In each chapter, you will find framing ideas and illustrative stories followed by reflections, which we have called On the Balcony, and exercises, which we've called On the Practice Field. The On the Balcony reflections are designed to provide you with a focused and structured way to think about the ideas and stories you've just heard in light of your own experience. And the On the Practice Field exercises are designed as low-risk experiments you might run as a way to try out some of those ideas in your leadership practice. You can do the reflections alone. The exercises involve engaging with others. The ideas build directly on two previous books in which we developed the adaptive leadership framework, Leadership Without Easy Answers and Leadership on the Line. You do not need to have read them to get value from the practice of adaptive leadership, but it would help you to have some familiarity with the overall framework. To give you a quick review if you're familiar with these ideas, or to provide a concise introduction if you're not, we have provided a chapter called The Theory Behind the Practice that distills some basic concepts we think you will find most useful in your work. In the rest of this book, the theory fades into the background in favor of practical application. The resources in this book, all the tools, lists, diagrams, reflections, exercises, and charts, were developed primarily for our engagements with client organizations, big and small, on every continent, except Antarctica, across public, private, and nonprofit sectors. We designed these resources to help you make significant progress on real challenges and opportunities. Each has been widely road-tested. We hope they constitute a useful smorgasbord from which to choose as you tackle the issues that move you or keep you awake at night. The book's resources are also designed to be used across teams and organizations. Shared language is important in leading adaptive change. When people begin to use the same words with the same meaning, they communicate more effectively, minimize misunderstandings, and gain the sense of being on the same page, even while grappling with significant differences on the issues. The language we have developed for adaptive leadership seems to fuel productive change much more powerfully than the languages that commonly swirl throughout organizations. That does not mean that our language is perfect, just that after more than 25 years of using it, we know it generates new and successful options for both diagnosis and action. To help you utilize this language, we've included a glossary. The practices provided in this book are concrete steps you can take to move a change initiative forward. However, they are best understood as vehicles for disciplined experiments. We think of adaptive leadership as an art, not a science, an art that requires an experimental mindset. Each practice presented in this book has been successful alone or in combination with others, but none is foolproof. Each depends to some degree on the situation in which you use it. We include them all here because so much of adaptive leadership work is iterative. You try something, see how it goes, learn from what happened, and then try something else. You tailor your interventions to the individuals involved and to the unique and shifting characteristics of the situation facing you. The examples we offer are drawn from the stories of people like you, individuals in organizations, communities, and societies who face difficult challenges and strive to create positive, enduring change. These stories come from 3 sources: our consulting and teaching experience, our own personal and professional challenges, and material in other books, case studies, and popular culture where our usage is derivative but seems to us, nevertheless, to illuminate a particular aspect of leadership practice. Adaptive challenges and adaptive capacity. In our work, people often come to us for assistance with a specific adaptive challenge. For example, a young but rapidly growing design and advertising business geared to the entertainment industry was stuck because the founder and CEO and the senior management team were colluding to keep the founder tied down in day-to-day operations so that he was unable to spend his time focusing on the strategic issues involved in exploding growth. They enjoyed their dependence on him, and he enjoyed continuing to do what he knew how to do well. The CEO came to us because he saw that the way he and his team were currently dealing with each other was unsustainable as the business grew. They faced adaptive challenges in building more widespread operating capacity, reducing the team's dependence, and developing the CEO's own leadership ability to take the organization to scale. Sometimes people come to us when they see big changes on the horizon in the external environment that will catch up with them soon, and they worry that the organization does not have the wherewithal to adapt and thrive in those new realities. So we start there with a larger frame for tackling the situation, building adaptive capacity. As an example, we were engaged by a recently globalized financial services firm coming off of highly profitable years where most people were quite self-satisfied. But several senior executives realized that not too far down the road, the firm's future growth potential would be at risk by a combination of factors: more nimble competitors in new markets, awkward post-merger conflicts between the parent and a large newly acquired organization, the difficulty of creating shared objectives within an organization spread in small pockets across the face of the globe, and a people pipeline not robust enough to produce the next generation of corporate leadership because it had never needed to be. They understood that tackling any one of those problems alone would avoid the deeper, broader issue, namely that the organization itself had to develop the capacity to adapt as a way of life to changing circumstances, had to learn how to live in a less predictable, more ambiguous competitive environment. Not surprisingly, in the process of helping them build the adaptive capacity to face an ongoing stream of adaptive challenges over time, we had to work with them on most of the discrete and immediate challenges they faced, too. The resources in this book are intended to be equally applicable whether you are starting with a singular vexing adaptive.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?